All right, welcome everybody to the Panda Security webinar on fundamental security patch management. My name is James Manning, and I am one of the pre-sales engineers here at Panda, and I am going to be your presenter today. I was trying to think up a little kind of a lead-in description for today's webinar, but I really just started giving away a little bit too much details in my head, so I'm going to kind of hold that off until we get into it and get into the slides. One thing before we get started that I will mention, and we usually always go over this at the beginning, for those of you that may be new to our webinars, as far as interaction is concerned, you're not going to have the ability today to be able to interact with me through voice. So we won't be able to talk back and forth throughout the presentation. But what we will do is we're going to reserve a little bit of time at the end of the presentation today for kind of a Q&A session. And the way we'll do that is you're going to have a little kind of a chat interface there on your web client that you'll be able to throw questions my way. And when we get to the end, I'll stop and we'll go over those. I'm also going to put up my contact details towards the end. So you guys, if something come up later on, you feel free to send me an email, throw me questions that way if you want to, and I'll be happy to get in touch with you. Or another route that you can have is, get in touch with your rep if you have one. You can go ahead and send them an email or give them a call and say you need to talk to me, and I'll be glad to reach out to you. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So my topics this month are a little bit different. The more I thought about it, I'm not really going to go into a lot of detail and explanation on these topics because we'll just spend way too much time. These will kind of work themselves out as you go through the presentation and you'll understand them. But to really give you kind of a high-level overview of what this all means, everything here is just kind of saying, essentially, patch management is good, you should do it, and we're going to try to help you accomplish that. So let's go ahead and jump in. First thing we're going to start out with is Mindshare. And one of the things we always like to do when we start these webinars out is kind of throw a question out to you, kind of get the wheels turning. So our question this month is, what do you think of or what comes to mind whenever I bring up the term securing endpoints? Excuse me. I'm willing to bet that most often the things that come to mind, and I know this is common with me as well, I would tend to think this way when we talk about securing endpoints, is things like antivirus or something like application control, firewalls, intrusion prevention, permissions, whether that's user permissions, file permissions, whatever it may be, and device control, and so on and so on. We tend to have this very proactive offensive mentality when we start thinking about securing endpoints. I think that's kind of been ingrained in us. And that's nothing to knock any of these approaches or to say that they're not necessary or overblown or anything like that. These are all very well and good. A lot of these are critical, especially in this day and age when we're really in an era that's getting fond of 0 days and social engineering through emails and encrypting machines and so on and so forth. So they're all very, very critical for your security posture. But are we often overlooking a really solid prime piece of the puzzle? So patch management, this is often missing from the conversation. Not so much when you start looking at conversations, say like on my side, when we're really in a really focused security context, we're with a security company, or you have somebody that is analyzing traffic or doing a blog or something like that, where they have a very big view, although it is focused towards security incidents, they have a very big view as far as the networks and the environments and things like that, where they're drawing data from. But when we start talking about the day-to-day single network conversations where it may be a little bit more quiet, this is something that's often missing. We don't hear patch management being thrown out as much. But yet, when you think about it, vulnerable software, or even to take a step back and say just outdated software, is often the root of the problem. So we're going to look at some statistics here. We've kind of gone over these before in other presentations, but they're good to kind of make a point. In terms of all software, since 2001, there's been an average of about 7,000 vulnerabilities each year over the past 4 years. The majority of the vulnerabilities have been rated high or medium, typically involving serious exposure. if we start to narrow that focus down to something a little bit more ubiquitous, we start talking about Microsoft. There's been an average of about 420 vulnerabilities in the last year, and that's a per year average. Leading types of these vulnerabilities typically involve something like code execution, buffer overflows, or information or privilege escalation. Information acquisition, usually privilege escalation. Now, I don't want to drill in too much on the security aspect of it. It is important, and I'm not trying to, knock any kind of software in Microsoft itself. It's really just to sort of illustrate a point, and that is that there are going to be changes needed to software, whether that's on a security perspective or some other perspective. As you see, there's going to be holes in software. There's going to be updates that are needed. And it illustrates the point that patching in itself is a fundamental feature in software. And as a matter of fact, I mean, it's necessity. The need for patching is expected, and it's enabled by core functionality such as upgrading and updating. We're talking about human beings that are compiling millions of lines of code, creating an application. There's going to be imperfections in that code. There's going to be, things that happen where maybe you don't get to add a feature in, or you had to do something in kind of a quick way and you want to later go back on and patch that. So the ability to update a piece of software after the fact, after it's out there in production, is expected from the get-go. And then here, from the security context, vulnerabilities are bad, so I don't want to make light of those either. But neglecting patching those vulnerabilities is even worse. But yet still, given those things, given those expectations of software having to be patched and the vulnerabilities that can expose us to security, we still fail on a regular basis, and I'm guilty of this as well, to do it fully and properly. So why is that? Why do we see that patch management becomes, forgive the phrase, redheaded stepchild? Why do we see that it's often something that is overlooked, or it's often something that's forgotten? It kind of falls down the list of importance there and the things that we have to do. Considering what we've looked at so far, why isn't it a more prominent, a little bit more fundamental and committed focus of software and security management? Well, I have a couple of ideas on this that I want to share with you. There's really, it's a couple of classes of thinking, and I kind of stumbled on another one of these a little bit later on that I'll throw in. But there was a couple of classes of thinking that I hit on, and I called them limitation and legacy, the danger twins. So when we talk about limitations, reasons we cannot do something, one of the biggest ones that we come across is impact. And impact is something that I probably have the most sympathy with. I can really understand this and see the pain points with it. When we're talking about impact, this is something that's increased by scale. So as you get bigger, or you get more specialized or sensitive in your day-to-day flow of the network, the impact grows. Downtime is a big impact as well for a lot of places. There's just no viable way to quickly and easily maybe take a server down to reboot it to go through updates or something like that. And then there's also the fact of personal time. A lot of times admins were wearing multiple hats, so your day is jam-packed, and you may have a life outside of the organization, so you can't work 24/7. So there's those time crunches that come into play as well. The next one is more along the lines of kind of a legacy thinking, and this is something that I call no squeaky wheels. It's the mindset that, well, nothing's gone wrong, everything's working just fine, so I'm not going to worry about it right now, I'll put it off. And another one, this one I would probably say is not as prominent, is something I had definitely heard in my day, and that is the belief that, well, I have antivirus installed, so I'm fine. If anything tries to use the vulnerability, my antivirus will stop it. And then there's just downright negligence. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not a big deal. In most cases, a lot of these are antiquated reasons for not patching. Like I said before, I have real sympathy for The impact side of it, where it's going to have a big impact on business to be bringing machines down and cycling through updates and doing all of those things, the difficulties that are inherent with that. But some of these others are just, they're not sufficient reasons for not patching. So if we persist in these kinds of classes of thinking, understanding impacts kind of sits by itself, but if we're talking about things like, I've got AV, I'm fine, or just downright neglecting it, or one of those, what do we really achieve? Are we saving ourselves a little bit of work? Are we getting some time back during the day? What do we think that we are achieving by continuing to neglect patch management? A good place to look at this, to focus on this, is costs. So when we fail to apply, our patches and our upgrades in a timely manner, the costs can add up. Now, all of these that we're going to go through here are not going to be applicable to every single environment. Some are going to be more specific to unique environments than others. So one of those is service costs. If you have something that happens, let's say an infection gets through or whatnot, you've got to get a specialist to come in and clean something up. That's going to be, money out of your pocket. Data recovery, same scenario. Let's say you have a finance person's laptop, or somebody in R&D, or a CEO with trade secrets on their machine, or so on and so forth. And their machine gets encrypted for whatever reason, or really hit. There may be valuable data on there that you have to have for business movement, for strategic measures. So you're going to need to get that data back. So you're talking about data recovery, and sometimes that can go into some really high dollar costs there. Audits, depending on the type of industry that you work in. If you're in healthcare, or if you're in PCI DSS, you're doing point of sale, that kind of stuff, there's a potential that any kind of a breach may force you to pay for an audit. Fines, depending on what they come up with those fines, you may be required to pay. Not only organizational, such as like PCI, but you may have state, federal, whatever. Throwing some things out there as far as fines where you have to pay. Legal fees, some of these scenarios as well. Again, depending on the organization that you're in, you may be required to get legal counsel to protect yourself from the impact of a breach. And as always, the ever-dreaded downtime. The downtime that you're going to take to reboot a server, to apply patches on a server, are probably going to take a lot less than some of the scenarios where you're going to have to bring everything offline to make sure that a network is clean and secure because you got breached. So compliance costs, I kind of hinted at this at the last slide. We'll look at a couple of areas here. PCI DSS. This is a standard, I guess, a requirement if you're doing point of sale, credit card transactions, things of that nature. So if there is a suspected breach that you have to report to PCI DSS, they're going to come in and do an examination of your network. That can run anywhere between $8,000 and $20,000 for a level 4 merchant. If there is a confirmed breach, you're looking at a cost of anywhere between $3 to $10 per card replacement cost, as well as $5,000 to $50,000 in compliance fines. HIPAA, Healthcare Information Portability Act, I believe it's called. Breach penalties, we'll just look at these briefly. Category 1, low-level breach penalty, anywhere from $100 all the way up to $50,000. Category 2, anywhere from $1,000 up to $50,000. Category 3 is a minimum of $10 grand up to $50,000, and in Category 4, forget it, you're just paying $50,000 right off the bat. So along with things like that, fines and fees that you got to pay for if you get breached, looking at business costs, there's some others that have an impact as well. If you get breached, you report it, it's known, maybe you get sued or something like that from customers, you class action, whatever it may be, you're going to have some additional costs. Number one is going to be insurance. There's a potential for your premium to increase up to 200% because of the breach. There's also the potential for you to undergo a denial of coverage until you have proof of the resolution of the issue. So that's one. Another one is just your business itself. If you're somebody that depends on a credit rating to do business, you may suffer from a downgrade. A good example of this is Target. Target was the one that was breached. They had stuff running in memory for a long time. It was on the network forever. Nobody ever saw it. They suffered from a downgrade from A+ to A by S&P, Standard & Poor's credit rating organization. And then trust. Deloitte & Touche did a study regarding brand trust and breaches. And what they found was that there is typically attrition that increases 30% and maintains at that rate over a 3-year period before it normalizes back to where it was. So you're looking at year after year, 30% loss in customers. So let's look at a few virus-related cost examples, going a little bit of a different direction here. This is more along the lines of damages. So you can almost look at these as kind of parallel costs, because if you got a virus in there doing some damage, you got hardware, software, you got to reinstall, whatever it may be, then you also got fines and fees over here that you're going to have to pay for. These can kind of compound. So some virus-related cost examples. Code Red, going all the way back to 2009. This exploited the vulnerability, the Microsoft vulnerability MSO-133. There was a patch available for this for 30 days already. It had already been out for a full month. The costs for this one were reported at $2.75 billion. That's the damages. The next one we want to look at is Sasser. This is going back to 2004. This exploited MSO-4-11. The patch for that was available for 17 days, so almost 3 weeks there. And the costs, the damages were a little bit lower for this. We're talking about maybe $500 million in costs for that. And then Conficker, one a little bit more recent. I remember this quite well. I exploited MSO-867. Patch in Wells for this was available for 30 days. The costs really jacked up on this one. It was reported $9.2 billion in costs for Conficker. And this is something that's only going to get worse over time. We've talked about this a lot in previous webinars. Nation state, like I say here, nation state shenanigans. As these guys go back and forth at each other, they're fighting. They've got a lot of specialized tools. They've got a lot of the best talent. So they're really creating some powerful and unique stuff that's out there. And these tools, once they're employed, have a tendency to leak over into the common market, and we start seeing them utilized in the commercial sphere. A lot of complex techniques, complex malware, as you're seeing with some of the NSA dumps and stuff like that, and very high impact payloads. So we're talking about old stuff back in 2001 and 2004 costing $2.75 billion, $500 million, $9 billion, just with worm activity and just making a havoc of things. The strength of these variants are just going to increase that. So given all that, given the moves in the malware that's out there, some of the tools and everything like that, we really need to start thinking for today. Our thinking has to adapt. As we talked about already, there's nation state hacking and the spillover effect, but we're also firmly entrenched in an era of financial motivation. And one of the things that does is it incentivizes persistence. So where before, back in 01, where you maybe had somebody putting out code red, they just wanted to show something off or illustrate a vulnerability, and that's it. Financial motivation. These guys can actually make money at this now. So they're not going to go and give up easily. They're going to create something that's very stealthy, very persistent, and they're going to keep at it. Commercialized infection vectors. So before, if you had to have the skill to do this kind of stuff, now you can almost easily go out there on the dark web and find an exploit kit or find something along those lines, or find somebody that rents a service for malware and push your stuff out. And then there's also, as we've seen before, we've talked about this over and over as well, there's a consistent year-over-year growth in malware. So that, we're talking about a numbers game. You've got a very high malware count. I think the last count we had that I remember was 227,000 samples every single day that we see in our labs. That's a numbers game. If you got a vulnerability sitting out there in the wide open, eventually it's going to get smacked around a little bit. So with all these factors, new offense requires a new defense. Part of that new defense is changing the way that we're thinking. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to go back and revisit old ghosts, if you will. We need to revisit some of those modes of thinking that we used in the past. And the one I mentioned, the squeaky wheel, I haven't heard anything going wrong. Everything must be fine. Nothing's breaking. Nobody's calling my phone. Well, unfortunately, the wheel may never squeak. And there's a good reason for that. It's because we're in an age of stealth, where before things were designed to illustrate a vulnerability or illustrate a weakness or show off. They don't want to do that now. They want to be quiet. They want to get on the machine. They don't want you to know that they're there, and they want to complete whatever it is that they're going to do before you catch them. Some of you might say, well, what about ransomware? What about encrypting malware? That's not silent. Okay, but it is. When we really look at encrypting malware, the most damaging part of that whole process is very much so silent. It gets onto the machine and may do a checkout and see if a command and control center is valid, and then it quietly starts to go about encrypting your machine. Only once the damage is done does it become noisy and say, hey, guess what? I hosed your machine, you owe me some money. Like we said, the outcomes are focused on data acquisition and ransom. The whole process there that I just described with encrypting malware. They want to be stealthy. They want to be silent. And just like that illustration I provided, if the wheel does squeak, it's likely too late. By the time that encrypting malware pops up that message on your screen, starts squeaking, the damage is done. You probably have a file share or something like that encrypted. The local machine is going to be encrypted as well, and you've got a lot of work ahead of you. The next one is impact. I said this is the one that I had sympathy for. I understand a lot of this. One thing to sort of ease the burden of this is that we are in an age of automation. We're seeing that across the board. A lot of places, we got a picture here of a auto assembly line full of robots. We've got a lot of other people, a lot of other companies that are exploring automation. So there's tools actually available in this industry and patch management and software distribution and stuff like that are available to help. They're going to provide you with a lot of hands-off sort of flexibility to be able to accomplish the things that you need. So if you've got unique time constraints where you can't reboot a machine at a certain time or you can't push software to it at a certain time, these tools of automation are going to help you to work with those schedules and be able to get these things done. And you have the ability to control that downtime as well. And then really the last line of thinking here that we talked about, negligence, and no, I have AV and I'm fine, I'm not worried about it. Well, the only thing that I have to say to that is this. That's what you're going to kind of be looking at if you persist in this line of thinking. One way or the other, one day or another, it's going to catch up to you. Now, the last one that I wanted to kind of illustrate, I don't have here in a slide because it kind of came to me later on, is sort of the progression itself of vulnerabilities just being what they were, or the lack of a feature, towards them being a security risk. Back when it was just well, this software doesn't work the way it was intended, but it's not a big deal, we're going to update that in a patch. Or, hey, there's an update for this software, we've got these new features X, Y, and Z in there. Okay, well, that's great. You didn't have to update because of those things right away. You could sit on it a little while. Upgrading a lot of times was a pain in the neck. Things could go wrong. So typically you'd kind of sit on your hands and you'd wait a little while, and then you'd go through, the patch process or the upgrade process or so on. But we're in an age now where we're seeing these sorts of weaknesses and holes and vulnerabilities and things like that being actively exploited. So I think our mentality has to catch up from, it's an update that's available, I'll do it a little later, until up to, all right, well, this is a vulnerability. This is something that can expose my entire network, and I need to prioritize this and take care of it as soon as possible. So how can Panda help? I said at the beginning, patch management is good. You should do it, and we want to help you. Number one, we kind of have a very unique perspective. You may have an organization out there that they're just focused on kind of the nuts and bolts of being able to apply patches to Windows or software or something like that. But they don't have a broad view of what can go wrong. Patch management, as we understand it, is very much a part of your security posture. There's exposure involved in a vulnerability being out there and available. Since that is the case, and since we are a security vendor, Panda is aligned with it, and we understand the need for effective patch management. We have 25 years really of frontline experience witnessing vulnerabilities being used and exploited. I told you earlier when we were talking about patch management being missing from the conversation, that was related to context. For us, we're seeing a lot of different networks on a regular basis. We're seeing the effects of vulnerabilities on a regular basis. We're seeing those things get exploited. Sometimes we're seeing what happens afterwards if something wasn't properly secured. So we've got a very broad view of all of these things happening. And that's powerful for you on the receiving end. In many cases, when it comes to patch management, we're in a very unique position to recognize and provide the right tools. Something that will illustrate that very well is, and I don't want to really beat a dead horse here, but the WannaCry event that happened with our patch management is, as soon as that started becoming an issue, we had tools in our consoles, our systems management consoles, specifically for that patch. We had monitors that went out to alert you if there were machines that had that vulnerability exposed, and then a patch that easily went out and pushed it out. So that's kind of what you get with a specialized security vendor. You have somebody that's aware of it. Hey, this is a big deal. This is a big issue. We need to create something that addresses this, make it easy for our customers, and do it quickly. So we do all of this with what we like to call, or what I like to call, is a term that I coined, a suite of success. And that is in Panda Cloud Systems Management and also the Advanced Reporting Tool. Advanced Reporting Tool is part of our Adaptive Defense 360 suite. So just some of the things that we can accomplish here. Number one, with systems management, we're going to give you the ability to patch on demand. So if you want to push things out right now, go ahead. You can push them out right now. If you need to set things up to operate on a schedule, you need it to run off hours, you want it to run on a Friday, you want it to run first thing in the morning, we're going to give you that flexibility in there to do that. But there's granularity in there as well. So you don't have to set up a schedule for everybody. You can just set one up for different sites or different work functions, whatever it may be. You also have the ability to test patches before deployment. This is big. Some are very sensitive to the effects of some of these patches. And Microsoft is not perfect by any means in patching their own software. We've seen patches that really have hosed everything. So we have mechanisms in place that will allow you to push patches out to a small subset of machines where you can monitor the effects before you push it out into production. With our policies, with our patch management techniques, you're able to control your reboots, your shutdowns as well. As we said before, we've been known to do custom patches in times of exposure. But beyond Windows patches, you can also push third-party patches. So any patch for any software. And then you can control multiple sites as well. You're not limited to just one. Different geographical sites, it doesn't matter. And then we also provide for you detailed reporting, letting you know which patches are installed, which patches are not, machine by machine, site by site. Now, the Advanced Reporting Tool, one of the things that we provide here is the ability to see vulnerable processes in the environment. You can view them by vendor or by device, and you can trace activity for vulnerable processes. This is very important. So you get in there and you get into the Advanced Reporting Tool. We have a section for installed and executed vulnerable processes. You can quickly go through, see what those vendors, what those processes are. You can see the version of the process. You could see where that process is installed. You get a machine name. You know explicitly where in your organization you have vulnerable software. You can then take all this info, go into your systems management, and then either find and deploy patches or push Windows updates, something along those lines. So some of the benefits of using Panda, of using systems management and the Advanced Reporting Tool, this flexibility that we described allows you to overcome some of these challenges, large or small. And we're talking about the impact thinkers here, the ones I have sympathy with. This gives you a lot of granularity, flexibility, to overcome these sorts of things. A global situational tool or view and proactive tools all under one login. We're talking about the advanced reporting tool here. You can look at all the processes in the entire environment. Cloud-based architecture provides anywhere, anytime access to all your sites. Simple implementation and management avoids additional labor costs, may reduce them, and increase efficiency. So this is not something where you're going to have to hire somebody to walk around to push patches every Friday or every third Friday, whatever it may be. This will cut down on those costs for you. And then we also have free, fully functional 30-day trials that are available upon demand. So all you have to do is talk to me, talk to your rep. We can arrange that for you and even walk you through a little bit of training or customer through a little bit of training, whatever the situation may be. So in summary, wrapping up today, 3 simple takeaways as we always like to provide. Don't fall victim to old ways of thinking. I know it's easy to kind of get into routine. I'm a very routine person myself. I like routine. But you know, when the ground's changing underneath us, we need to be able to adapt to that. So we have to catch up to the reality of the way things are today. As we just said, threat landscape has changed. We've got to adapt. The costs, as we saw, are high. And there are tools that now exist to help ease the burden of effectively patching your environment. Seeing what's out there as far as our vulnerable processes, our vulnerable applications, pushing out Windows updates, pushing out those vendor patches and things of that nature that make it a lot easier for us. It's not as painful as it used to be in the past. And ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. I'm going to go ahead right now, and I'm going to leave the floor open to any questions, any comments. We'll leave it open for probably about 5 minutes or so, and we'll go ahead and answer those at that time. All right, well, it looks like we don't have any questions today, so I want to thank you guys again for attending. Like I said before, if anything comes up, if any questions come to mind afterwards, feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to get in touch with you and go over those questions. Thank you guys again for coming.